Mr. Michel Forst, thank you very much for being with us for the interview. I would like to understand how serious is the situation of environmental activists in the world? Do they have problem of being beaten, threatened with death?
Okay, I've been, as you know, working with the UN for quite a number of years, and the broad issue of environmental defenders is something that I know pretty well. I've been traveling in almost 60 countries in the world to meet with them precisely, to listen to testimonies, stories, and how they're facing repressions, sometimes killings. And I can tell you that the situation of those defenders is very serious, in fact. If you look at reports prepared by NGOs like Global Witness or Frontline Defenders or Amnesty, you would see that many of them are killed in many parts of the world. And if you look at the data on killings of defenders, you would see that 80% of those who are killed, in fact, are climate activists and environmental defenders, mostly in Latin America, in countries like Colombia, Mexico, Peru, other countries in the region, but also in Africa, in in Asia, and in the Gulf region as well. In Europe, the situation is so complicated, in fact. They are not facing similar threats like in Latin America. They are not killed, but sometimes they are arrested. They are facing also heavy fines in some countries. So that's why this mandate has been created, in fact. And because precisely states that are party to the Arus Convention saw that amongst those who are the most at risk were environmental defenders, they decided to create a new mechanism to protect them, and that's why I've been appointed in October 22 to this new mandate with the UN.
Yeah, and while here in Romania, do we have such big issues? We know we had, but what do you heard about our issues?
Well, having been appointed in October 22, I've decided to travel to countries to meet with governments, to explain this new mandate, and to look for backing, political support from government, sometimes also financial support, because without money you can do nothing. And at each and every occasion, I'm also trying to meet with defenders to listen to their voices, in fact, because you cannot do nothing if you don't first listen to the voice of those who are affected by decisions by government. So I've not been invited precisely in Romania, but it's part of a big tour in Europe. I've been visiting more than 20 countries, mostly EU countries, but also countries outside Europe, EU, to get a sense of what's happening in Europe as well, because the mandate is very much focusing on countries in Europe. The Arus Convention is 46 states, including the EU. And I've been invited to Romania by an organization that you know, Bankwatch, to precisely to give a lecture, but also to meet with the government, and also to take time to meet with defenders, to listen to their testimonies. And from what I understand from my discussion with Bankwatch, I see that there might be issues for the mandate. There might also be complaints addressed to my mandate, but I'm not able to say anything on this because we have the meeting only this afternoon. And before saying anything on Romania, I want to hear testimonies, stories, recommendations. Recommendations are also important for the mandate because, as I said, you can do nothing without hearing the voice of those who are affected, and sometimes they know better than you what to do, what solutions to provide. I'm also having discussions with the government. That's part of my tour in Europe, also not only to discuss political backing, but sometimes also to raise issues with the government after having heard testimonies from the defenders.
Yeah, I understand you have no conclusion yet, but you'll have, because we had a lot of issues with rangers, forest rangers that have been killed by thieves. We had a lot of NGOs that are threatened with trials in justice. They're also beaten. We had a lot of these kind of stories. My question is, when you will heard this, what could be your measures? What you could practically do for these people?
I mean, I would like to first to say that rangers are part of my mandate, in fact. They are considered by the mandate as being defenders, in fact. So that's also important to listen to the voice of those who would provide me with testimonies on what's happening to rangers here in Romania. So when defenders are at risk of penalization, threats, harassment, abduction sometimes, or killings, they have the possibility to send a complaint to my mandate. And the mandate is a rapid response mechanism. That is, I need to respond immediately when I receive a complaint. The first task is to investigate on the complaint to make sure that the mandate is not manipulated, because on some occasions states are very able to manipulate UN mandates. So we need to double check information to make sure that the information is serious. And then we have many means, many forms of action to take. The first is what we call an allegation letter. That is, we don't accuse the state or the company, because sometimes in many countries it's not the state but company that are most dangerous for defenders. And we send those allegation letters, which is an allegation by which we say we have received a complaint, and we explain the complaint, and we ask the government to come to comment. And they have 60 days to reply to my letter. And because the Aarhus Convention is a legally binding instrument, states have an obligation to respond. Same with companies, they have an obligation to respond within 60 days. And in the meantime, within the 60 days, everything is not public, in fact. No? And even the victim would not know that have been taking action on her or his behalf.
And after 60 days, what
happens?
The
idea is to look for a solution. That is to make sure that there would be a solution to the problem. Of course, if someone has been killed, then we need to find the perpetrators. Impunity is very much a phenomenon by which you see state repeating the same action. So solving the problem is the main purpose of the mandate. So after those allegation letters, we discuss with the government to find proper solutions. So it's difficult to comment because it's tailor-made, and each case is different to other one.
There are any punishment?
Yeah. Just when life is at risk, that is when someone has been abducted or is facing the risk to be killed, then we cannot wait 60 days, of course. Then I would go immediately public. Sending a public appeal, of course raising with the government the problem, and then discussing immediate solution for the people that are at risk.
I understand. There are any punishment against the government or state that are not doing enough for preserving these people?
Yes, of course there are. There are sanctions. It's a long-term process.
Could you give me an example of sanctions?
Yes, it's not immediate sanctions. That if I see that a state is not cooperating with my mandate, would not comply with my recommendations, would decide not to implement my recommendations, then I would go to another mechanism within the Aarhus Convention, which is the compliance committee, another committee, and then the last resort could be the expulsion from the country to the scope of the Aarhus Convention. The last country was Belarus, because they did not want to comply with the main provision of the convention.
And could you give me an example of the sanction that we understand what?
Yeah, the mere fact that the country would be expelled from the convention itself is a sanction, in fact, a diplomatic sanction. It has huge implication. Like, for instance, if a EU country would be expelled from the Aarhus Convention, then would have the implication in terms of funding coming from the EU to the country. So it's a very powerful instrument.
Yeah, we saw also some environmental organizations that are expecting some changes in environmental issues. So they are vandalize some artworks. What is your opinion about that?
I would not say vandalization. In fact, that's a form of action that we call civil disobedience, which is protected by international treaties, in fact. And you're right that in many countries in Europe, governments, the police, the justice system does not apply international human rights law. So that's a failure from the states to apply obligations. There is an agreement with the UN that is when states ratify a convention, they have to implement all the provisions of the convention. And in this case, civil disobedience is covered, is protected. In those countries in which those young activists are using new forms of mobilization and are punished, then it's a failure of states to comply with the provisions. I'm doing currently a tour in Europe to meet with many of them, mainly young people, climate activists, those who are gluing their hands on the table, on the floor, blocking access to airport, blocking a road,
going to the museum and throwing paints on the painters, yeah?
Mostly it's not painting, it's soup or throwing something on monuments, and that's, in fact, that's civil disobedience. In fact, civil disobedience is an act by which someone decides.
So for me to understand, you try to protect these environmental organizations.
I try to protect them from being punished too harsh by the government.
So why are you protecting them? Why?
Because they are using the right to protest, the right to protest, and the right to protest is protected by international treaties. In fact, of course, they are using new forms of mobilization. You may not agree with them, but the right to protest is protected by the UN. So states have an obligation to respect those who are using those forms of mobilization.
You say it's not a vandalization. Why is not a vandalization?
Of course, they are breaking the law, and they know precisely that they are breaking the law, precisely because they want to draw the attention to the public, or to the public opinion, or to the government, that the government is not doing enough, like, for instance, to implement the Paris Agreement. They know that they are facing the law. They will be brought to court, and then they are prepared to face sanctions. But what we see is that, in fact, the media and public officials, like ministers, are calling them like eco-terrorists, or green Talibans, or green Khmers, forgetting, in fact, what is a terrorist. In fact, those people are non-violent activists that are using new forms of mobilization. They are not terrorists. And the mere fact that a minister in France, in Denmark, in Austria, in Germany would call them terrorists is a signal that something is going wrong, in fact. And by the fact that a minister would do that, then the media would also do the same. That is, they would cover the action itself and not explain why those people are going to the street. And that, it has an impact, in fact, on how the population would perceive those activists.
How you would call these people like Greta Thunberg? I suppose yes.
Yeah.
How you call
activists?
Activists.
They are climate activists. Climate activists that are using non-formal, non-usual forms of mobilization, but which is protected by the law. And you see that in France, they are violently beaten by the police, in fact. In Germany, the same. In UK, they are also facing heavy fines, heavy sanctions, up to 3 years prison for a woman who is simply doing slow march in the street, of course blocking access to a street, but only for going slowly in the street, protesting against the fact that the UK is not doing enough to implement the Paris Agreement, being sentenced to 3 years prison.
What about the process of Greta Thunberg, also in UK?
Yes, the same, in fact. So many of them are currently facing heavy fines. You see that they're also facing not only prison, but also heavy financial sanctions. And sometimes it could ruin the life of someone. I mean, they are forced to sell their goods, sell their house to pay the fine, in fact, which is something which is not acceptable. So we need to, the mandate is there also to raise awareness on states, on state obligations to respect international human rights law.
Mm-hmm. My last question is about Romania. Do you know there are any sanction about our country from, I don't know, your mandate or other international environmental organization that are looking for how our authorities are doing in this issue?
Again, I'm not able to comment anything on Romania because I had yesterday night and I'm meeting this afternoon with defenders and with the government as well to discuss the situation. So, but again, I know that Romania has been already at many occasions in many UN treaties the target of attention. So if you look at different treaties and conventions, you would see that Romania sometimes also has been put under the scrutiny of the international community.
Yeah. Mr. Michel Forst, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you for the invitation.